I want to speak about the issue of animal welfare, and for this video, I'm going to focus on a specific issue, although I might broaden it a little bit because it's not often I speak about this subject. Um, so, just been reading a report in the newspaper about the Yulin dog eating festival in Shanxi province in China, um, which has attracted quite a lot of controversy this year. Basically, it's in the title. It's an event where dog eating takes part. Um, and basically, the article goes on to explain that there's animal rights activists who are campaigning against this event on the grounds that it's cruel. And the report goes on to talk about the attitudes among netizens in China. One thing I would say, when it comes to pretty much any issue in China, or indeed that matter for any country, what you can't do is assume that everybody has the same opinion. Now, needless to say that Western websites like Facebook are blocked in China, so any online campaign on something like Facebook is going to have minimal impact in China because the government blocks it and the only people that can see it is those who have a VPN. So it's going to have a minimal impact. One thing though I would say about China is this assumption that everyone thinks the same way is misguided. So when either Westerners or Chinese make generalizations about the Chinese, it is wrong. Some netizens have said, for example, foreigners should mind their own business. Well, my question to them would be, okay, you're saying foreigners should mind their own business, but what about other Chinese who also have a problem with this? Um, I just want to weigh into the moral debate about dog eating. I'll just come out and say it, dog eating. This is a contentious issue at stake. Now, dog eating is something that goes back a very, very, very long way in China, eating dog meat. According to the report, it predates recorded history, so it's something that goes back millennia. In some parts of the south of China, it's seen as having health properties. The report suggests, for example, it's common among older people, um, and it is definitely more prevalent in some parts of China than other parts. I would say it's um, my speculation is that it is more common in Guangdong province and Fujian than it is in some other parts of China. So this is not exactly a nationwide phenomenon. It's not like you go into any Chinese village and you'll see people eating dogs. For a long time, it was used by, dare I say it, Western imperialists to sort of see the Chinese as backward and uncivilized. This was used as justification in past sort of stereotypes of the Chinese as being backward. Um, it's worth noting that it isn't just China where this practice takes place. It also occurs in the Philippines and in Vietnam. Um, Now, in terms of dog eating as a moral argument, this is my thoughts on the matter. I really believe that you need to consider that in different parts of the world, different types of animals have a different sentimental link. So in the West, and actually increasingly in China, dogs are seen as pets. They're seen as man's best friend, and there's something taboo about the idea of a human being eating this lovable, cuddly pet. But in China, the sort of dogs that are eaten tend to be a different breed from dogs that are kept as pets. That's an important point to make. And increasingly in China, especially young women tend to treat dogs just the way Westerners treat dogs. Several of my female Chinese friends have pet dogs, and they certainly wouldn't dream of eating them. So I think the stereotype, whilst it has some truth, as a general rule, it's definitely not the case that the Chinese eat dogs. That's something that's being, I believe, overblown out of proportion. But in terms of the moral argument, and this is something I want to talk about, the taboo nature of eating a dog, as opposed to, here in the West, the average person has no problem with eating pig meat or cow meat. Now, in the case of cows, that's considered sacred in Hinduism. So maybe Indians think the British are, well, how can they eat cows? Obviously, eating pork is taboo in Islam. So, what animals we consider to be unclean And in Judaism as well, I believe eating pork is taboo. But what animals we consider to be unclean or worthy of being eaten, i.e., not worthy, but downgraded enough to be eaten, as opposed to those that are sacred or kept as pets. Um, for me, the issue is not about what sort of meat it is. I'll be quite honest, I don't lose a lot of sleep over the idea of people eating dog meat. The reason being is that if you're going to make a moral argument, then how can you possibly argue dogs are more sacrosanct than cows or sheep or pigs or any other living creature? If you're going to make that argument, at least be consistent about it. The vegetarians, that's fine. I respect their position because they're opposed to all meat eating. But for people who eat meat but have a problem with eating dog meat, I think that's a bit hypocritical. For me, the issue is not what sort of animal it is, but rather the way it is prepared. That's where I take issue. And this may offend some people, but I'm going to say it. China has a massive problem with animal welfare issues. Um, Now, no doubt many Chinese people will say, oh, but you find that in every country. True, you do. But in China, there's almost no laws against it. I've seen things in China that made my stomach turn, and I don't consider myself a particularly sensitive person on these issues. But generally speaking, the way animals are treated is not good in China. It's just not. And I know China is a developing country, but my point would be if you can't look after animals, then don't keep them. I'll give an example. I was in a park in the city that I was studying in Hunan province, and in that park there was a zoo. Now, I'm aware that there are people who believe zoos are completely immoral, and I believe there is a debate to be had about that. Anyway, I visited the zoo, and looking around it, I felt deeply uncomfortable. The enclosures were small, very cramped. There was a sun bear. It was pretty much dying because it was dehydrated. It did have a bowl of water, but the water was filthy. Its enclosure was smaller than my room, just to give you an idea. The enclosure was smaller than that. We're talking about quite a large animal. There was a dead crocodile with birds picking at it. There was a scraggy looking young lion. This was really unsettling. And like I said, I'm not super sensitive on these issues the way some people would be, but I felt very uncomfortable about that. And the first thing we done after leaving was we looked up online animal welfare organization in Hong Kong and reported the zoo to them. There wasn't even any zookeepers around, except for the girl who sold us the ticket. There was nobody that looked like they were even looking after the animals or anything. Um, and there was some young Chinese teenagers there, and they seemed completely desensitized. They asked us to take pictures for them, and like oh, it's just a fun day out. They couldn't seem to understand this. This was There was something not right about this. Um, Without going off too much on a tangent on the issue of zoos, my view is that overall, I don't think they're a particularly good thing, and I am open-minded to those who say they should be outright banned. My only concern is in situations where animals are endangered, I would argue there might be a case for saying that they're safer in a controlled environment than they would be from poachers in the wild. Because in a country like Kenya, the army and the military simply cannot be there all the time, no matter how hard they try. This is almost a war going on. And unfortunately, the number of animals being killed in the wild continues to be very high. So you could argue zoos are immoral, but to me, it's almost like a lesser of two evils. Although I'm very open-minded to the arguments against that. We, of course, have seen the footage of the floods in the Georgian Republic um, and the zoo in Tbilisi. Now, one thing, actually, you know what? I'm going to get back to that at the end of the video because I don't want to go off on a tangent. So bear with me. I'll come back to that issue. Regarding China, again, when I was there, another disturbing thing I saw was a slaughterhouse. And I saw that, and if you are a sensitive person, maybe stop listening now. But I saw the skulls of dogs that had clearly been butchered. And, you know, the thing that troubled me was not that the dogs had been killed. That wasn't the issue. It was the fact that these dogs were kept in appalling conditions. They were mangy. They were kept in cages. And I don't know if it's true or not, but if it is true, it's reprehensible. They're beaten to death. This is not a quick, painless death. They're beaten to death. Now, I find that rather sickening. And if some Chinese netizens are offended by what I'm saying, then so be it. Um, I feel deeply uneasy about this. I've always been someone who's been outspoken on human rights issues, and I haven't spoken that much about animal welfare issues. Um, but this was something that made me very uncomfortable. Not the fact that dogs are being killed. I really don't think, for me at least, that is not the main issue, the fact that dogs are being eaten. Because if they were kept in a way that was humane, and if they were killed in the humane way, I wouldn't have a major problem with it because it's not like they're an endangered species, but rather it's the way they are killed and the way they are treated that made me very uneasy. And the interesting thing about this market, I saw dogs kept in cages, and the purpose was quite obvious. Yet on the street above, young women were walking a different breed of dog like it was a pet. It was like this contrast I couldn't get my head around. The sort of dogs that tend to be eaten in China tend to be crossbreed, mangy. Well, like I said, the crossbreeds. I'm not sure what breed you could describe them as, but they almost look like, yeah, they're crossbreeds, but they look like pathetic little creatures. And like I said, I'm not a super sensitive person on these issues, but I did find it difficult. And so many people in China seem utterly desensitized to this. And I'm not making a generalization. I'm not saying it's everyone, but a lot of people seem desensitized. On another occasion, we were in a countryside, like hut enclosure place, having lunch, and this little mangy dog was wandering around, and I was kind of secretly hoping, I hope that's not on the menu. Um, Simply because, not that I would say I wouldn't have a major problem with eating dog meat. Like I say, for me the issue is how it's prepared. Anyway, I remember a girl I was with saying that she was scared of the dog, and I said, "Well, don't worry, it's probably not going to hurt you." And I said it's probably much more scared of us. But she again didn't seem to register that fact. To her, it was just like she was desensitized. It was like this is a wild beast, and doesn't matter how they treat it. So I have to admit there is an aspect to this I find very unsettling. Now I know in China there's this sort of nationalistic response every time Westerners talk about these things. What I would say about this is, if what you're saying is that it is unfair to criticize China when there's animal welfare issues in other countries, what I would say is that is true. There are animal welfare issues in other countries, and actually people are consistent. They do criticize those issues in other countries, including their own countries. But the difference is in China, there's pretty much no laws, or at least very weak laws, in terms of acting on this. And that is the problem. Now, in the United Kingdom, we do have animal abuse, there's no question about it. But we actually have a very influential charity called the RSPCA, which has liaison with the police. That is, if someone is abusing their pet, people can report it to them. Um, we have also taken progressive steps such as banning fox hunting, which in my view was a good move because fox hunting is just a cruel blood sport. In the old days, we had things like cockfighting, which was getting cocks to fight, bear baiting, this sort of thing. Um, another thing I would mention about the dog eating thing, it wasn't that long ago that it happened in Europe as well. Right up until the 19th century, certainly East End of London, people, as far as I know, would eat dog and cat meat well into the 19th century. So, when we talk about, I think it's a bit hypocritical to look down on the Chinese for this. So, in conclusion, on this issue, my only contention is the way the dog is prepared. I just don't see why it needs to be so cruel, and why there's an utter lack of any sort of I understand if these animals are being reared for food, then you're not going to get a sentimental attachment to them. I understand that. But I still believe that there is a better way to kill them than beating them to death and skinning them and this sort of thing. I find that skinning them when they're alive is just sickening. I mean, and before people get into denials about this, I would suggest just, you know, step back a bit and consider that these things are real. I've seen it with my own eyes. This is not something I'm reading online. I have seen this with my own eyes. Okay, and it is something that makes me very uncomfortable. I'm not a hypocrite. I eat meat, and again, the issue here is not how the meat is, what sort of meat it is. I really don't lose a lot of sleep over the fact that people are eating dog meat. Some people are eating dog meat. That for me really isn't the issue. The issue is how they are prepared. And yes, I would say the same thing about other types of meat. You know, if cows are badly treated or pigs are badly treated, I would be saying exactly the same thing. So I'm not a hypocrite. I do eat meat, and I'm not condemning people eating dog meat. And I would say to people who have that position, whether you're going to be consistent and condemn people for eating other types of meat. If you're a vegetarian, I understand you would have very strong views on this, and I respect those views. But to people who do eat meat and condemn this, well, I would just say be consistent in your argument. I eat meat, and I'm being consistent in the sense that I don't have a problem with the meat that is being eaten, but rather how it's prepared. That's the issue I'm getting at. Now, brief word about the situation in the Tbilisi Zoo. One thing I find interesting is there is, especially in Western countries, there is this sort of massive sentimentality about animal welfare and zoos and that sort of thing. So a lot of people, when they heard that a tiger had been shot for mauling a man to death, everyone was sort of like, "Oh, the poor tiger! What terrible people! How dare they do this?" And the whole time I'm thinking, well, it is an unfortunate situation, and I fully understand that tigers are endangered, but just wait a second. A man has been mauled. Now, I do find it hard to understand people who really don't give a shit about other human beings and then have a sentimental feeling about wild animals. Now, you might think what you want about that, but I would ask you, if you had a young child, are you honestly telling me that you would expect, and there was a situation like that, a wild animal was mauling a young child, would you honestly expect people in authority, whether they be soldiers or zookeepers or whatever, to not act on that and not take immediate action? To me, that is insane. A tranquilizer would not have the same effect as an immediate shot. So I believe that was necessary, and it's a tragic situation, but I can't see any other way. A man was being mauled to death. And I just find it strange that 19 people have died, 19 human beings, and all anyone is caring about is the animals in the zoo. I understand that, the animals have no say, and it is a sad situation. It is sad to see these beautiful creatures wandering around. So I'm not desensitized to that. But I get irritated with people who really they take the love of animals to an extent where they become desensitized to fellow human beings. That pisses me off. I think it's just another point I would make. This notion that no animals are capable of any sort of malicious act. Well, you could argue that in an evolutionary sense, human beings are a lot more cunning than other species. But the idea that there is no cruelty in the animal world is just a false one, because there's certain bird species, for example, that deliberately abandon their young. Now, from a scientific perspective, what is the rationale for that? Is it because the young slow them down? Now, in the human world, we would think, oh, they're a bad parent. You see what I'm getting at? Now, people will say I'm stupid and the animals don't have the same sort of intelligence, so we shouldn't ascribe the same sort of convention to them, and I do understand that. But what I just don't get is people who take their crusading agenda for animal welfare to the point of being utterly desensitized to other humans. Now, I'll tell you something right now. If I had young children, and if there was a circumstance where a wild animal attacked them, I would kill that wild animal on a heartbeat, maybe risk my own life doing so. But I would get any object I would find, and I would use force against that animal. Now, my question to animal rights crusaders: are you honestly saying that human beings shouldn't protect other human beings because, in your view, the animal is more important? That is nonsensical to me. So You know, I think it's a sad situation. I wish the tiger wasn't killed, but a man was being mauled to death. A tranquilizer gun would not have had the sort of effect that shooting it would have had. It would not have been able to. Now, unfortunately, the man died anyway, but it's just a sad situation all around. Now, this could well be a compelling case for closing down the zoo and arguing against zoos. But and I have no problem with people who want to make that debate. I think there's a fair point in it. What I take issue with is people who are just totally desensitized to fellow human beings. And they almost act like, I mean, how do you know, for example, that the man who was mauled to death didn't share your views? Maybe he wanted to see zoos banned as well. Maybe he was an animal lover for all you know. I remember there's a scene, maybe this is a bad example, but there's a scene in the film 28 Days Later, which is a zombie dystopian film. And it starts off with some animal rights activists breaking into Cambridge laboratories where they have chimpanzees tied up and so on. And I mean, just for the record, I've got mixed views on that. I don't like it. And I do think there should be alternative methods used. But anyway, these animal rights hardliners break in and they sort of, they see the scientists and they hold him and say, just stand there, scumbag, this sort of thing. But anyway, one of the chimpanzees escapes, and if you've seen the film, you'll know that they're infected with the rage virus. Anyway, the chimpanzee proceeds to maul one of the activists, a young woman, to death, and she's screaming, "Get it off me! Get it off me!" So like hardline animal rights people, I think they're hypocrites because a wild animal is just as dangerous to them as it is to anybody. You can love an animal as much as you want, but a wild animal is a wild animal. And a wild animal is not going to discriminate if you're an animal lover or if you're a hunter. Um, so, that's okay, granted that is a fiction film, but the point still stands. Anyway, I've covered a lot of issues here generally about animal welfare. So, in conclusion, I do believe that as human beings, we have responsibility to be compassionate to a large extent. But I don't believe in putting animals before human beings. And I believe some animal rights hardliners do believe in that. And as for the dog eating thing in China, firstly, it's exaggerated. Most Chinese do not eat dog meat. Secondly, for me, the issue is not about the eating of that particular type of meat, but how the dogs are prepared for it. And I do think there should be more action taken against that. This is not universal. There are divided opinions on this in China. Recently, some guys tried to kidnap some dogs from a village. The locals tied them up, roughed them up, and then called the police. So, this is not a universal thing. But I will say, if you're very sensitive about animal welfare issues, don't go to China because, and to my Chinese viewers, no, I'm not saying China's unique. I'm not saying other countries don't have these issues. But let's just be honest about it. This is quite a prominent issue. It just is. Thanks for watching.